There are places beneath our world, places of darkness, of silence, of crushing depths where time stands still, places where the air grows thin, where the walls tighten around you, and where even the strongest can't escape. These are the places that don't just take lives, they swallow them whole. A father trapped beneath the earth, his final words lost in the void. A diver slipping into an abyss so deep, even the light cannot follow. A group of boys huddled together in rising water, their breath fading as the cave closes in. These are not just stories. These are real. And the caves, they are still waiting. Tonight, we step into the depths, into the shadows where the air grows thin and the walls whisper your fate. This is the true horror of the most dangerous cave incidents in history. The shadow of Nutty Putty Cave. The night air was cold, and the stars glimmered like distant eyes, watching as 26-year-old John Edward Jones took his first deep breath before stepping into Nutty Putty Cave. It was supposed to be just another adventure, a quick Thanksgiving trip with his family before heading back to medical school. He had been caving since childhood, his father guiding him through tight passageways, teaching him how to navigate the earth's deepest veins. But nothing had prepared him for what lay ahead, because this time, the cave was hungry, and it had no intention of letting him go. Nutty Putty was notorious among Utah's cave explorers. The tunnels weren't just narrow, they were like the twisted, suffocating arteries of a beast waiting to squeeze the life from whoever dared to venture too deep. But John, eager to prove himself, decided to explore the cave's tightest sections. He maneuvered through cramped, winding corridors, his headlamp casting eerie shadows against the damp rock walls. He felt the damp air thickening, the scent of earth and dust filling his lungs. Every scrape of his clothing against the walls was magnified in the silence, the echoes making it sound as if the cave itself was breathing. He had heard whispers about a notorious tunnel known as the Birth Canal, a tight passage that challenged even the most experienced spelunkers. But what John was looking for was something even more extreme, a narrow, uncharted passage that promised an exhilarating squeeze. He crawled forward, inch by inch, pressing his body against the cold, unyielding limestone, feeling it constrict him like a python. He pushed forward, arms stretched ahead, feet kicking behind, wriggling deeper into the abyss. And then it happened. John took a wrong turn. Instead of reaching a larger chamber, he found himself wedged in a crevice so tight that even breathing became a struggle. Panic set in like a wave of ice. He tried to back out, but there was no room. The cave had him, held in a grip that would not loosen. His body was trapped at an awful angle, head first, his arms pinned, his heartbeat a deafening drum in his ears. At first, he stayed calm. He had been in tight spaces before. He told himself to breathe, to think, to be rational. He would just push himself backward, wiggle his way out. But every movement wedged him tighter. His body, slick with sweat, refused to budge. His chest was crushed against stone, making each breath shallower, harder. He shouted, his voice swallowed instantly by the heavy darkness. Hours passed. The cave had swallowed him whole, and the walls pressed against him like the ribs of some ancient beast. He heard voices above, faint at first, then louder. His brother had realized he was missing and called for help. A rescue team arrived, their voices echoing through the tunnels, hope flickering like the beams of their headlamps. But the deeper they crawled, the more they realized how dire the situation was. They reached him, but his position was unnatural, cruel. He was upside down, gravity forcing blood into his head, his body unable to shift. Every attempt to move him made things worse. The rescuers tried chiseling the rock, rigging ropes, anything to pry him free from the death grip of the earth. But the cave wasn't letting go. The hours stretched into a nightmare. John's strength began to fail. His words slurred. The pressure on his body, the unbearable blood pooling in his head, began to drown his consciousness. The rescuers fought, some crying in frustration, others whispering prayers, but the rock walls stayed silent, unmoving. John's last words were for his family. He told them he loved them. He told them he was sorry. And then, the cave took him. After 27 hours of desperate rescue attempts, John Edward Jones was pronounced dead. The cave, victorious, refused to release him. The authorities sealed the tunnel, turning his resting place into a tomb, forever hidden beneath the earth. Nutty Putty Cave was closed, its hunger finally satisfied. But those who remember the story know that it still waits, silent, patient, a mouth forever open, waiting for its next victim. The Abyss of Floyd Collins. The biting wind howled through the Kentucky hills, rustling the barren branches of the trees surrounding Sand Cave. It was winter, 1925, and Floyd Collins had no fear. He had spent his entire life beneath these lands, his fingers tracing their rocky veins, his body moving like a shadow through the tunnels that ran beneath the earth. Caves were his domain, his hunting grounds, his kingdom. But on January 30th, the cave would claim its throne. Floyd had made a career out of caves. He knew them like others knew the back of their hands, finding passages no man had ever seen, squeezing through cracks that would send lesser explorers running. But he wanted more. A big discovery, an entrance to Mammoth Cave that would draw in tourists, fortune, and fame. That morning, he crawled deep into Sand Cave, determined to find a passage that would link to the world's longest cave system. With nothing but a flickering lantern and his instincts to guide him, he slid his body through the narrow, winding tunnels, each breath thick with dust. His progress was slow, deliberate. The cave wasn't a place for rushing. It was patient, timeless, a living entity of stone that shifted when no one was looking. Floyd crawled deeper, the walls squeezing him, his breath echoing against the cold limestone. He knew this cave well. He had explored its depths many times, mapping its secrets, memorizing its twists. But even the most experienced explorers make mistakes. His boot nudged a loose rock. A sound, a low, sickening rumble, shook the tunnel. In an instant, the weight of the earth shifted. The rock dislodged, tumbling onto his foot, pinning it beneath its crushing weight. Floyd gasped, his hands scrabbling against the dirt, his muscles straining as he tried to free himself. But it was useless. The boulder had settled, a cruel executioner trapping him in the darkness. At first, he remained calm. He had been stuck before. He would work his way out, inch by inch. But every pull, every desperate twist, sent sharp bolts of pain shooting up his leg. He reached for his lantern, the flickering flame barely illuminating the jagged walls. The tunnel was so narrow that he couldn't even turn his head properly. The weight of the earth pressed against him, suffocating. Hours passed, then a day. His family noticed his absence and sent for help. By then, his voice had grown hoarse from screaming. When rescuers arrived, they found him deep in the cave, his face slick with sweat, his body trembling with exhaustion. They worked frantically, chipping away at the rock, trying to lift it, to pull him free. But the tunnel was too tight. They couldn't reach him properly. Floyd's ordeal stretched into a waking nightmare. The cold crept into his bones, the damp air settling in his lungs. His rescuers fought against time, against the unyielding rock, against the cave itself. They brought him food, water, and blankets, trying to keep him alive while they figured out how to free him. The world above took notice. Reporters swarmed the site, broadcasting his suffering to the nation. Thousands of people gathered outside Sand Cave, drawn by morbid curiosity, hoping to witness a miracle. But nature is indifferent to the desperation of men. Rain fell, the cave flooding with icy water. The walls weakened. With every passing hour, Floyd's strength ebbed away. The rescuers made one final attempt, trying to dig a new shaft to reach him. But the earth was unstable. The tunnel collapsed further. Floyd Collins was lost. When the final rescue attempt failed, silence settled over Sand Cave. The crowds dispersed. The reporters moved on. The rescuers stood helpless at the cave's entrance, knowing that below, in the eternal dark, Floyd Collins lay entombed. The cave had won. Days later, the decision was made to leave his body where it lay. Sand Cave was sealed, his resting place left untouched, a tombstone of stone and shadow. But those who pass by on quiet nights still say they hear something. Faint whispers, the sound of scraping, the ghostly echoes of a man forever trying to claw his way free. The Lost Boys of the Rising Water. The Tham Luang Cave Rescue. The entrance to Tham Luang Cave was like the mouth of a sleeping beast, dark, yawning, patient. It had swallowed adventurers before, held them in its belly, and only spat them out when it was satisfied. But on June 23, 2018, it took more than it ever had before. 12 boys, members of the Wild Boars soccer team, and their coach, Ekapol Chantawong, were full of energy as they pedaled their bikes toward the cave. It was meant to be a quick adventure, a celebration after practice. They had done it before, sneaking into the cave, exploring its twisting tunnels, laughing as they squeezed through narrow rock corridors. But this time, the cave had a secret waiting for them. As they ventured deeper inside, the rain began. At first, just a soft patter, the sound barely audible through the thick jungle canopy. But the monsoon season had arrived early, and soon the heavens opened up, dumping relentless sheets of water onto the land. The ground was already saturated, the rivers full. The rain found every crevice, every crack, and poured into the cave's open throat. The boys had gone too far. They didn't realize what was happening until it was too late. The entrance they had come through was now underwater, swallowed by the rising flood. Their way out was gone. They scrambled deeper into the cave, seeking higher ground. The walls seemed to close in around them, the light from their flashlights reflecting off the cold, slick rock. The air turned thick, damp, suffocating. The sound of water rushing through the tunnels was deafening, a monstrous roar in the darkness. And then there was silence. No way out. No food. No contact with the outside world. The only thing they had was each other, and time that was running out. Days passed. The boys sat huddled together on a sliver of dry ground, their bodies shivering, their stomachs twisting in hunger. Their coach, a former Buddhist monk, kept them calm. He taught them to meditate, to conserve energy, to fight the panic clawing at their minds. Outside, their disappearance sparked a desperate search. Families gathered, their cries swallowed by the jungle. The Thai Navy SEALs arrived, followed by elite divers from around the world. But the cave had transformed into a labyrinth of death. The tunnels were now underwater, black and unforgiving. The currents were vicious, the visibility near zero. Every move was a gamble. Every dive could be the last. Then, on the 10th day, 2 British divers, Rick Stanton and John Valanthan, pushed deeper than anyone had dared before. Their flashlights pierced the darkness, slicing through the murky water. Their oxygen tanks hissed in the silence. Then, a movement. A dozen pairs of eyes reflected back at them. Thin faces, trembling bodies. A whisper of disbelief. They're alive. The news spread like wildfire, but relief quickly turned to dread. Finding them was one thing, getting them out was another. The boys were trapped miles inside, through a flooded maze that even the best divers barely survived. There was no way they could swim out. The rescuers fought against time. Oxygen levels in the chamber were dropping. The monsoons threatened to drown the cave entirely. The only solution was unthinkable, sedating the boys and pulling them through the treacherous tunnels unconscious. One by one, the boys were given a powerful sedative cocktail, keeping them just on the edge of consciousness. Divers strapped them to stretchers, secured their oxygen masks, and plunged into the blackness. Each trip was a battle against death. One wrong move, one failed mask, one moment of panic, and the child would drown. But the impossible happened. After 18 days in the abyss, All 12 boys and their coach were pulled from the cave, weak but alive. The world watched in stunned relief. But the cave had claimed its price. A Thai Navy SEAL, Saman Kunan, lost his life delivering oxygen tanks. Another, Beirut Pakbara, later succumbed to a blood infection from the rescue. The wild boars had escaped the beast, but the cave remains, silent and waiting, a black maw that never forgets those who enter. The death trap of the Boesmansgat Cave. The cold waters of Boesmansgat, known as Bushman's Hole, were a void of endless darkness. It was a place few dared to enter, a vertical underwater cave plunging 282 meters, 927 feet, into the Earth's crust, one of the deepest submerged caverns in the world. It had claimed lives before, and it was hungry again. Dave Shaw was no ordinary diver. He was a man drawn to the abyss, a deep-sea explorer who thrived in the most extreme environments. A commercial airline pilot by profession, he had spent years pushing the limits of technical diving, going deeper than most humans would ever dare. In October 2004, Shaw made a historic dive into Boesmansgat. At 270 meters, 886 feet, deep in the sunless water, his flashlight caught something unnatural, a skeleton. Suspended in the eternal blackness was the body of Dion Dreyer, a young diver who had vanished 10 years earlier. His body had become trapped in the cave, lost to time. Shaw resurfaced, shaken but determined. He would go back. He would recover Dion's body, return him to his family, and close a tragic chapter. But he didn't know that the cave had other plans. On January 8, 2005, Shaw descended once more into Boesmansgat, carrying a body bag, a dive reel, and the determination to bring Dreyer home. The world held its breath. His dive was monitored by an elite team of fellow divers, medics, and scientists. But deep below, in the silent tomb of the cave, Shaw was utterly alone. At 270 meters, he found Dion's body exactly where he had last seen it. The plan was simple. Secure the body in the bag, attach a line, and ascend. But nothing in Boesmansgat was simple. The body, long preserved by the freezing depths, had become fragile. The moment Shaw tried to move it, disaster struck. The decomposed remains disintegrated in his hands, limbs separating, the skeleton falling apart piece by piece. The line he had attached twisted, snagging around him like a noose. His heart rate spiked. His oxygen levels plummeted. The blackness pressed against him. He tried to cut himself free, but every motion burned through his limited air supply. He was 270 meters below the surface, and every second mattered. The walls of the cave seemed to close in, the weight of the water crushing him. Above, his support divers waited. The seconds stretched into minutes. Then, too many minutes. Then, silence. Dave Shaw never resurfaced. His body was later found entangled in the very line meant to retrieve Dion Dreyer. His camera, still attached to his helmet, recorded his final moments. A diver trapped, out of time, unable to fight the unrelenting pull of the abyss. Days later, the recovery team finally brought both Shaw and Dreyer to the surface, their bodies intertwined in death. Boesmansgat remains, waiting in silence. It has claimed many, and it will claim again. Because the deep doesn't care about skill. It doesn't care about courage. It only cares about those who dare to enter its black embrace. The final dive. The grim fate of Yuri Lipski in the Blue Hole. The Red Sea shimmered under the Egyptian sun, the waves lapping gently against the shore. From above, the water was a mesmerizing shade of sapphire, hiding what lay beneath. But those who knew the area spoke of a place where divers vanished, where the sea held onto bodies and never returned them. They called it the Divers' Cemetery, a deep, deceptive cavern known as the Blue Hole of Dahab. Yuri Lipski was an experienced diver, but experience meant nothing to the abyss. On April 28, 2000, armed with a helmet-mounted camera, He descended into the blue hole, eager to push his limits. He had heard the stories, the warnings, but they only fueled his excitement. He wanted to go deeper than most had dared before. He wanted to see the arch, a deadly tunnel 55 meters, 180 feet, down that led out into the open sea. But the sea does not care about what men want. With every meter he descended, the light faded, and the water grew colder, heavier. At 40 meters, he should have stopped. Recreational diving limits end at 30 meters, without specialized gas mixtures. Past that, the human body begins to betray itself. The brain clouds. Time distorts. Judgment fails. Yuri ignored the warnings. He kept sinking. At 50 meters, he entered a danger zone few survive. His mind, deprived of oxygen, no longer recognized danger. The nitrogen narcosis had begun, an intoxicating, drunken euphoria that convinced him he was invincible. His camera captured his erratic movements, his hand gestures, the slight delay in his reactions. The deeper he went, the more reality slipped away. At 60 meters, there was no turning back. The arch was now in sight, a gaping, dark maw leading into the open ocean. But the illusion of distance in the deep is deceptive. What seemed close was still meters away, and his air supply was dwindling fast. His brain, clouded by narcosis, failed to register the danger. He should have turned around, but he didn't. Then, panic. At 91 meters, 300 feet, something in Yuri's brain clicked. His body, realizing it was dying, fought back. His movements became frantic. He flailed, reaching for something, anything. But the water offered no grip. His breathing quickened. Each inhale was shallow, desperate. His air supply was running out. And then, his camera captured it, the moment he realized he was going to die. His arms stopped moving. His body stiffened. The narcosis had taken full control, warping his perception. His body was shutting down, paralyzed by the toxic gases he had inhaled at such crushing depths. He tried to ascend, kicking weakly, but it was too late. His movements slowed. His eyes, wide and frozen in terror, stared into the void. His regulator slipped from his mouth. A final burst of bubbles escaped, rising toward the surface, toward the unreachable safety above. Yuri Lipski died at 91 meters, alone in the crushing silence of the blue hole. His camera continued recording. When rescue divers recovered his body, they found his camera still attached to his helmet. What they saw on the footage haunted them. A man trapped in his final moments, consciousness fading, the abyss swallowing him whole. The blue hole remains, waiting, its deadly arch luring more divers into its depths. Over 200 people have perished there, their bodies lost to the sea, their stories dissolved into the currents. Because the ocean does not forgive, it only consumes. The echoes of the deep, the tragic fate of the Plura. Cave divers. The Norwegian wilderness stretched endlessly, blanketed in ice and silence. Hidden beneath its frozen lakes and mountains was something far older, far more menacing, a labyrinth of flooded tunnels known as Plura Cave, one of the deepest and most dangerous underwater cave systems in the world. It was a place where the light never touched, where the only sound was the slow exhale of bubbles rising toward the unreachable surface. In February 2014, 5 Finnish divers, seasoned, fearless, and experienced in technical cave diving, set out to conquer the depths of Plura. Their goal was ambitious, to traverse the 2-kilometer underwater passage from Plura to the remote lake Steinuglaflaget, a journey few had attempted. They had the best equipment, the best training, and the best preparation. But preparation means nothing when the cave decides otherwise. The first phase of the dive was smooth. They descended into the freezing water, their headlights slicing through the absolute blackness. Every movement had to be precise. Any mistake at these depths could mean death. The tunnels twisted and turned, narrowing into suffocating crawl spaces, where a single wrong move could trap a diver forever. And then, the unthinkable happened. As they squeezed through an especially tight, sloping passage at 130 meters, 426 feet deep, something went horribly wrong. One of the divers, Yuri Lipski, struggled to move. His bulky equipment got caught in the rock. He couldn't move forward, and worse, he couldn't back out. His heart rate spiked. Panic surged through his veins. He thrashed, trying to free himself, but the cave was merciless. The others tried to help, but space was too tight. There was no room to maneuver, no room to turn around, no room to even breathe properly. Then, his oxygen supply failed. The frigid water closed in. His breathing quickened. He gasped, trying to suck in air, but there was none. The abyss swallowed him. Behind him, another diver, Patrick Grunqvist, saw what was happening. His own heart pounded in his chest, the crushing weight of the situation hitting him all at once. He knew they had to get out. Now. But there was no way forward, and now, no way back. Trapped. A second diver, Hari Usimaki, tried to turn around. But turning at 130 meters in a tunnel no wider than a human body was impossible. He struggled, his oxygen depleting, his movements becoming frantic. The water around him swirled, kicking up silt, blinding them all. The cave had claimed 2 lives in a matter of minutes. The survivors were in grave danger. With visibility gone and panic creeping into their minds, they fought against the crushing pressure of the deep, against the raw terror threatening to take control. They had to leave their friends behind. With every ounce of willpower, they forced themselves to remain calm. Slowly, methodically, they followed the guideline they had placed, pulling themselves away from the death trap. After what felt like an eternity, they emerged from the other side, shaken, barely alive, carrying the weight of horror in their lungs. But their friends were still down there. For days, their bodies remained trapped in the depths, unreachable. The authorities refused to mount a recovery mission. It was simply too dangerous. The cave had won, and the world above was forced to accept its verdict. But the survivors refused to let it end that way. Months later, against all odds, a team of elite Finnish divers returned, not to explore, but to bring their fallen brothers home. They risked their own lives, diving back into the same hellish passage, navigating the same treacherous tunnels. The cold clawed at them. The darkness pressed against them. Every heartbeat, every breath, reminded them that they were one mistake away from sharing the same fate. And yet, they did the impossible. They recovered the bodies. They fought the cave, and won. But Plura Cave is still there, waiting in silence, knowing that sooner or later, another diver will come. And not all of them will return.